Thank you all for joining us today. This session is going to be about graduate school applications and tests. I'm James Whitt, one of the admins in the Psychological Science Department, and joining us is also Mr. Gillison, who is the academic advisor for psychology. So talking about graduate applications, there's a couple different components. So there's the application itself and the application fee, as well as your test scores, transcripts, your resume and CV, your personal statement, and your recommendation letters. So we'll be going over all of that today. So first things first, we'll be going over the application and the application fee. So for the application fee, much like it is for an undergraduate application, it's going to vary a little bit depending on the school and where you're going, but it can range anywhere from like $25 up to $100 depending on the program and the university. In terms of the actual application, the format's going to be very similar to when you applied for undergraduate. So it's going to be a very similar layout where you're kind of filling in a lot of your information about your name, social security number, your previous education, things like that. In terms of deadlines, it's going to vary. In general, doctoral programs have a fall application deadline, whereas master's programs tend to be spring. Those deadlines can vary between there. So some of the doctoral applications may be due in October, some may be due in December. So you're just going to want to make sure that you're keeping those in mind as you're looking at your programs you're interested in. The other thing to keep in mind is there are three types of deadlines. So there's a priority, a regular, and a rolling admissions. So priority, that means that your application will be given the most priority under consideration. So a lot of times programs will say we have this priority deadline. If we have remaining spots to fill, this is the regular admissions deadline. And that regular admissions deadline means that that is the very final deadline, that they will not take any applications after that. And then rolling admissions just means that, and this tends to be more at the master's level, for this program, they will accept anyone as long as they have spots remaining. There will still be a kind of final rolling admissions deadline, but that may be quite late. It could be even up to like a month before the start of the term that you would be beginning in. The other thing to keep in mind with the deadlines is that what is important is you need to have your complete application done by that deadline. So you need to have all your test scores gotten in, all your recommendation letters in, everything needs to be in, and your application needs to be complete by that deadline. So if you turn in everything, but you kind of waited around for your test scores, your application will not be complete until those test scores get there, and you may not be considered if you don't get everything in by that deadline. The other thing you'll want to look out for are cohort programs. So these are going to be a lot more structured. So for example, at UNC Charlotte, in our IO psychology program, it's a cohort system that only accepts students every other year, starting in even years. So for example, this year they are not accepting applications. They will accept applications next fall. And then those same students will be the cohort of the IO program for those 2 years. And then once they graduate, they'll bring in another cohort. So that's one cohort model. Another model is every year in fall or spring, they may bring in this cohort of students, and then they kind of go throughout the program at the same pace, and ideally will all finish at the same time. The other thing that you may see, but is very uncommon, is a writing sample. So this writing sample is just a way for them to kind of judge how good your writing skills are, your research skills, that sort of things. For undergraduate students, your writing sample is normally going to be a good paper that you've done in one of your classes. So for example, if you took Research Methods 2 or Critical Thinking About Research in Psychology, that would be a good way to go for your writing sample, as well as if you did like a senior seminar paper. You want something that's just a scholarly paper, that's very well written, and that you've put a lot of time into. So next we'll be talking about the test and test scores. One note before we get into that though is due to COVID, like a lot of things, many programs have eliminated the test score requirements during COVID. We're not sure exactly how that's going to look kind of this next upcoming application cycle, just because things have started to get back into this go of things, and the test providers have started to allow at-home testing and different things like that. So you may not be able to, depending on the program, but the two main tests are the GRE and the MAT. They do both currently offer at-home options, but there are additional requirements that you'll need to do them at home. So there's additional testing equipment and space requirements, and you can go to their website to kind of look at it in more detail, but just know that that is an option, and that programs are keeping in mind kind of COVID and everything. So this next application cycle, you may still see a lot of them saying, we're not going to need test scores due to COVID. All right, so for test scores, like we said, the main two that you're going to see are the MAT and the GRE. So a couple things that they have in common. You have the ability to send the scores when you take the test. That is normally what you'll want to do, because there is an additional fee if you want to send the score after you have taken the test. Your scores are good for 5 years, and both the MAT and the GRE, the MAT is hosted by Pearson, the GRE by ETS. Both websites offer a lot of good free test prep, and I would suggest using those to kind of familiarize yourself with the material and kind of what the test will look like. And then you can kind of see what areas you may need more work on, and then you can kind of get and buy additional preparation work for them. For the GRE in particular, Kaplan and ETS both have test booklets that they publish new ones every year, and those are two very good ones. And then the other thing to note is, even outside of COVID, a lot of programs have started making test scores optional, especially at the master's level. And this has kind of been an ongoing discussion among programs throughout the United States about whether or not test scores are helpful or harmful in the determination process. So depending on when you're going to be applying for programs, that may be more common by the time that you're actually getting to your application. So if your test scores are optional and you choose not to take the test, that's not going to hurt you. If you do take the test and you get good scores, you can still send those if they are optional, and that can definitely still benefit you. So now we'll go over a little more in depth about what the tests are. So we'll start with the MAT, which is the Miller Analogies test. Like I said before, this is administered by Pearson. The fee will depend on the testing location. For UNC Charlotte, we do offer testing through the counseling center for $80. If you're currently not on campus or you're away and kind of doing things, there's a full list available on Pearson's website of everywhere for every state and everywhere you can think of where exactly you can go and how much it'll be. So what does the test look like? So the score is going to range from 200 to 600, and your test is going to be 60 minutes with 120 partial analogies. You do not get penalized for incorrect answers, and the questions are going to center on your relationship, the relationship between ideas and general knowledge of humanities, natural sciences, mathematics, and social sciences. So what does that look like? So here's one of the examples from their website. So as you can see, they're all going to be kind of in the same setup as A to B is the same as C to D. So you can read this in two ways. One, it can be read as A is related to B in the same way that C is related to D. The other way it can be read is A is the same or is related to C in the same way that B is related to D. The first term A and the last term D will never be related. So for example, plane is to air as car is to blank. The correct answer is obviously C, land. Planes fly in the air, cars drive on land. So that's kind of what your whole test is going to be, is 120 questions that are very similar to this. So the other test you can take is the GRE. This is normally the preferred and most used test. It is going to be a lot longer. It is administered by the Educational Testing Services, ETS. It is much more expensive at $205 standardized, regardless of where you take it. Completely computerized test. It's going to be about 3 hours and 45 minutes with 6 sections and a 10-minute break between sections 3 and 4. Within one section, you can move between the questions kind of freely as much as you'd like. Again, you will not be penalized for any incorrect answers, and there's 4 section types. So the first is your analytical writing, then you have verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and then your unscored and research questions. The other thing to keep in mind with this test is that because it is so much longer, it is going to be a little more taxing. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're taking it. Just be prepared for this to be a little bit lengthier of a test. And it is very similar to the SAT, kind of in setup and everything, if you did take that test. So what do the sections kind of look like? So the analytical writing section, you will get 2 of those. They are each 30 minutes. They're always going to be the first 2 sections. One section is going to be analyze an issue. One is going to be analyze an argument. For verbal reasoning, you'll get 2 sections, and it'll be 30 minutes each for those, and you'll get 20 minutes per section. For quantitative reasoning, you'll get 2 sections of those, and those will be 35 minutes each. You'll get 20 questions per section, and you'll also get an on-screen calculator provided. You'll also be given if you're taking it in person, a blank piece of paper and a pencil that you can write with that you will have to turn in at the end. And then your unscored and research questions. So this is going to be either a verbal reasoning or a quantitative reasoning section that is going to be unscored. So it will not be counted towards your score, and it'll be test questions that they are testing to see if they want to use them later. You're not going to know which section is or isn't being tested. So you will have to try and do your best on all the sections. Just know that, for example, if you get 3 verbal reasoning sections, one of those is going to be unscored, obviously, but you won't know which one of the 3. So now we'll go over what the analytical writing section will look like. So this is going to be scored on a 0 to 6 point scale with half-point increments, so anywhere from 0 to 6. Commonly, you'll see things like 3, 3.5, 4. That tends to be about the average. Like we said before, there's 2 types: analyze an issue and analyze an argument. And here is an example of analyze an issue. So you get a question or your issue, and then it'll give you a little bit of directions. So for this one, universities should require every student to take a variety of courses outside the student's field of study. And then the directions are: write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the claim. In developing and supporting your position, be sure to address the most compelling reasons and or examples that could be used to challenge your position. So this is kind of the setup you'll get for both of them. Obviously, in the argument one, you'll be given a statement and told to argue one or the other side. For both of them, you'll want to make sure that you're trying your best to spell everything correctly, use proper grammar, everything. You won't have access to spell checker or the internet or anything, so it's just going to be kind of a blank Word document, and you'll just kind of type your response and then turn it in after that section's over. So for verbal reasoning, this is on a 130 to 170 scale in 1-point increments. There's 3 types of questions that will be on this section. So reading comprehension, text completion, and sentence equivalence. So an example question is provided here for text completion. So in parts of the Arctic, the land grades into the landmass so blank that you can walk off the coast and not know you are over the hidden sea. So for this one, it would be B, imperceptibly. And this is where a lot of your vocab is going to come in handy. So normally for the verbal reasoning, if you're not doing well in that, what is recommended is working on flashcards to kind of up your vocab and different things like that, as well as working on kind of paragraph and reading comprehension. So next is quantitative reasoning. Again, this one is also on a 130 to 170 scale in 1-point increments. This one's going to be a little bit different because there are 4 content areas: arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. And then there's 4 question types: comparison, select 1 multiple choice, select 1 or more multiple choice, and numeric entry. So the way this one will work is each question is going to come from 1 content area and be 1 question type. So you may have one that's an arithmetic comparison, and then your next question may be an arithmetic numeric entry. So the example we have here is algebra numeric entry. So for this question, 1 pen costs 25 cents and 1 marker costs 35 cents. At those prices, what is the total cost of 18 pens and 100 markers? So for this section, the thing to note is if you have not taken any math since high school, Good news, there's no new math on here, so it doesn't include trigonometry, calculus, or any high-level maths. You're going to stop at kind of your algebras and the maths that you would have done in high school or early college. The other thing to note is because you do not get an actual calculator, you just have the on-screen calculator and your paper and pencil, you're going to have to do a lot of this by hand. So making sure that you've brushed on your math skills and kind of can reason things out is going to be very important. And then lastly, there are subject tests for the GRE, particularly in psychology. It's going to vary by program, but normally most programs aren't going to request that you have the subject test in psychology. It's normally not needed, normally because they want you to have a certain amount of foundation in psychology already. So by having a minor or a major or however many credits they want, that's how they kind of verify that you have that background without the subject test. But just know that if you do look at a program and it does require this, this may be something you have to do. There's also going to be practice books and test preparation available for the subject tests as well. So next we'll move on to transcripts. So you have unofficial and official. You will need to supply one copy of every transcript for every university you've ever attended since high school. So even if you only took 2 classes at a community college, they're going to want to see those transcripts anyways. Normally, the way it works is for the application, you'll provide an unofficial transcript that you'll just kind of upload into the system. And then once you've been accepted, the grad school will require that they are sent official copies from each institution. Normally, what you can do for UNC Charlotte transcripts is in Banner self-service, kind of go to your unofficial transcript, and you can just kind of print page it and then save that as a PDF. That's normally one of the easiest ways. Next is your resume or CV. So this will normally be asked for just to kind of see what you've been doing outside of the classroom. Make sure on your resume to highlight your relevant skills to the program, such as research, leadership, counseling skills, communication skills, etc. You just want to make sure that whatever is important to that program, you're highlighting in the application as much as you can. And the resume is just another good place to do that. If you need to, the Career Center offers a lot of resume critiquing, and you can set up appointments to have your resume looked at, and they'll give you a lot of feedback and kind of work through a couple different iterations of it with you, as well as if you have a faculty member or other people that you're asking for recommendation letters for, you can also ask them to review your resume and kind of help you get it to where it needs to be. So next, the personal statement. In general, your personal statement is going to be about your background and interests, your reason for applying, and what you want to do after the program. So the important things to note are if they request information, make sure to include it. I don't review applications very much, but for the health psychology PhD program, I do kind of help aggregate all the information. And I can't tell you, there are a lot of people who we specifically ask them to identify the faculty they want to work with, and you still always have like 3 or 4 that don't, and that automatically already hurts them a little bit. You also want to make sure that it's formatted correctly if they ask for specific formatting. If not, you want to use just general formatting to help make it easier to read. And you also want to make sure that you have proper grammar and spelling. So now we'll go over an example of one example of a personal statement. So this is an example from Kent State University's Clinical Psychology PhD program. So theirs is going to be pretty short. So theirs is statement of career goals and purpose, describing your motivation for graduate study, your future professional goals, and your reasons for having selected Kent State University for graduate study. You are encouraged to identify any faculty with whom you have a particular interest in working. So you can see in this one, it's a little more broad, and they leave a lot of things up to you to kind of go over. Whereas in our second one, so I was talking about it a little bit before, but for our health psychology PhD program, they're a lot more specific. So your personal statement should be 2 to 3 pages in length and double spaced. Please make sure to address the following topics. How does health psychology training fit into your overall professional interests and short and long-term career goals? That is, why are you applying to our program in health psychology? Which concentration are you applying and why? Among community, clinical, and general. Describe your interests in research and applied work as it relates to this concentration. Which faculty member in our program would you like to have as a mentor, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see kind of the difference where depending on the program, they may spell things out very specifically. They may even have like a set of questions they want you to answer very specifically, or they may kind of leave it a little bit up to you to kind of guide how you want to do it. And then recommendation letters. So this is going to, again, vary by program, but typically you're going to need 3 recommendation letters. They can be from any discipline, but you want to try to align them as best you can to the program you're looking for. So if you're applying to a program in counseling, and you had a history professor that you had a couple classes in, you probably don't want to do that unless you have some way to kind of tie that history professor and their relationship with you into that counseling program. You also want to try to use mostly academic recommenders as much as you can. Obviously, if you have a lot of volunteer work or internship with a lot of different places and they're very meaningful relationships, you can use those, but you want to try and use mostly academic. And you want to make sure that these are meaningful relationships. So if you just had a couple classes with somebody, you don't want to ask them. People you want to ask are people who can say something about you more than you could look at your transcript. So if I can look at your transcript and see what the recommender is saying in their letter without even reading the letter, just by your transcript, that's not a very good recommendation letter. So you're going to want to try and get people that you've worked with as a TA or RA, an advisor for an organization that you were heavily involved in, a supervisor for an internship or job, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to make sure that this is somebody who, I would say minimum, has had a working relationship with you for about a year, if not more, and you want to have done something meaningful with them. So you want them to be almost a supervisor or a mentor or something directly that they can speak to your leadership, communication, and all those skills that you're trying to highlight on your resume. And then some helpful tips for getting those good recommendation letters out of your recommenders is include your resume and your CV, the program, and your personal statement when you ask for your recommendation letters. That way they can kind of see what does the program want, how are they already kind of talking about that in their resume and personal statement, and they can try and help highlight your strengths as well as talk to any particular weaknesses or if you have any gaps in education. You also want to give them plenty of time, at least a month, if not more. And you want to kind of talk to them beforehand. And hopefully this will be somebody, your recommenders are somebody that you're kind of talking with throughout, so they can kind of help you select programs and everything so that they're in the loop the entire process. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. We will now open it up if any of you have any questions. All right, looks like we have a question from Lisa. We are at home due to COVID, and if we have not had the opportunity to build a rapport with professors past taking a class, then what do you suggest for recommendation letters?
Lisa, I think the main thing to do is like, I know that there's still some research stuff going on, and I know that professors have had TAs during COVID time. So that could be a good opportunity. And then also the practicum with Dr. McNulty, which is an internship program in the department. Your placement, if you get placed somewhere and do well there, that could be good as well. Whenever I went to grad school, I'll just tell you my personal thing. My supervisor at work, which what they spoke to was more of like just work ethic and um, ability to communicate with people, because that's kind of like what higher ed's about, is being able to work with a diverse group of people and being able to talk to anybody about anything. And I used a supervisor, I used a professor, and I think I used 2 professors, and those professors were professors that I knew relatively well. I had like my program was really small in my bachelor's, and I had each of those professors for like 3 or 4 classes apiece. Um, but I totally understand that, like, not having the ability to be in person dampens, the ability to build rapport, but you can still build rapport potentially doing the practicum with whoever your placement is with, and then also potentially doing like a TA or doing a research assistantship with one of the professors in the fall. I think that'd be the best thing to do. The one thing I will say about recommendation letters too is they will ask you if you want to waive the right to, I don't think we talked about this, but whenever you do your recommendation letters, what essentially you will do is you will just write down the people's names and you will write down their email addresses on the application. And then the school that you're applying to will reach out to those people to submit a letter or to just fill out a survey, essentially, with your information on it. And there is a waive or not to waive option. And what that is the student has the ability to waive their right to review the recommendations, or they refuse the right, or they waive their right to do it, or they do not waive their right to do it. And then you can look through the recommendations that people submitted for you. This may not seem straightforward, but it actually is kind of a bad look if you don't waive your right to review your recommendations, because it's like the people you've asked to be your recommenders, you don't trust what they're saying. Like, you want to be able to go back and review it. So we always will tell students to like waive their right, because if you ask somebody to be a recommender and they agree to do it, you would assume in 99.9% of situations that they're not going to say anything but good stuff about you as a student, or they wouldn't have agreed to do it in the first place.
Yeah, the only other things I would add are, even if they're in online classes and everything, you can still try and build that kind of like personal connection by going to their office hours or emailing them and things like that. And making sure to, like Mr. Gillison said, be professional in those emails and during those office hours. And just remember, it's not like you're talking to your friend, so try to be like you're writing an actual letter to somebody. You don't want to be using like, hey, what are you do? What are you up to? That sort of stuff. You want to be professional and use proper grammar and proper spelling, and don't use kind of like abbreviations like BRB or things like that. You want to make it seem like you're writing an actual letter to these people. It'll feel a little weird and kind of unnecessary, but it does really help, and it helps to build that kind of professional connection. And then later, as time goes on, you may get closer to that personal connection and you may not have to, but you always want to start out as formal as you can. We have another question in chat from Lexi. Do you recommend applying to multiple different schools for graduate school, or is it pretty normal to just apply to one? And in terms of applying to different schools or just one, I would say in most cases, most people are applying to more than one school, and the people who are looking at applications and everything know that you're not just applying to one school. And that's normally just because you don't, if you've been to some of our other ones, we've talked about acceptance rates and things, and the acceptance rates can be kind of low, even among 90% of the applicants are all kind of those similar GPA ranges and everything. So a lot of it may just come down to like fit with particular faculty and things like that. So that's why most people do apply to multiple schools. So for example, when I was an undergrad and applying to schools, I applied to 3 schools in general. And from what I remember talking to other people who were applying to schools, 3 to 4 tended to be the average most people would apply to. You don't see too much more than that, just because at that point it's starting to get kind of like almost a full-time job just to apply to all these schools. But normally people don't just apply to one.
And if they're on the higher end of cost too, and you apply to like 10, I mean, that you're looking at multiple thousands of dollars that you've got just in, application submissions and stuff. So, and then if all your transcript stuff is free, then you don't have to worry about that. But I think applying to like 3, 4 is a good idea. Maybe a few more than that, maybe a few less than that. Just don't apply to everyone, because apply to the ones that you really want to be in. And I have a lot of students who are really, really good students that it's kind of shocked me this last year, but they didn't get into grad school, and um, they applied like all over the place. And then this year, where they didn't get in on this cycle for, what was it? They weren't accepted for the fall cycle of last year, but they have gotten in this year. So um, it just took a little extra time, I guess. And the amount of people who are applying is, a big deal too. And I think like maybe applications for graduate schools they probably went up last year a little bit because of people being stuck at home and doing stuff remotely. So the chance of going back to school would have been easier.
All right, so if there are no more questions, we will go ahead and conclude today's session. Thank you all so much for attending. Have a good night.